This coming evening on 2, you can get your teeth into a generous helping of Brighton Rock when rock group Erasure perform live at the Brighton Dome in the show that knows no limits, and it begins at 6 this coming evening.
This is the Open University. The following programme for the Arts Foundation course looks at Cragside House in Northumberland and discovers how and why it was created.
It's not difficult to find a romantic viewpoint for Cragside, where,
as if by the magician's wand, the whole scene has changed. The happy combination of nature and art has transformed the erstwhile howling wilderness into a very Garden of Eden.
that writer, in 1903, clearly accepted without question the success, and indeed the beauty, of this complete gentleman's residence, hidden in its now mature forest. There certainly was a transformation of the bare hillside. But we need to ask whose taste was being satisfied, whose was the magic, and how it worked. To understand Cragside, we have to peel off the layers of its history, construction, design, and commissioning. What we see is the completion of a whole series of extensions to this relatively modest mansion. And we need to ask why the work was undertaken and for whom. This house was built in 1863 as a second home for William Armstrong, an industrialist and inventor who had pioneered hydraulic motors as early as 1839. 6 years later, he developed hydraulic cranes and opened a factory at Elsick near Newcastle to manufacture them. But his greatest wealth came from his development of the breech-loading gun with rifled steel barrel in the years after the Crimean War. He donated his patents to the government in 1858, and the next year he was knighted, while his works at Elsick continued to grow until, by the 1880s, they were one of the largest heavy manufacturing plants in Europe. So he was already a man of substance and eminence when he bought a small amount of land about 30 miles north of Newcastle in his favourite fishing retreat in Coquette Dale. There he built this relatively modest house. Over the next 30 years, Lord Armstrong, as he was later to become, steadily extended his mansion until the original house was quite lost in the new work. But 1863 was not the peak of his financial career. Bigger and better guns were supplied for armies in America, Denmark, Turkey, Egypt, Italy, Chile, and Peru. In 1867, Armstrong moved into the field of naval armaments with the gunboat Staunch. Then, in 1870, came the profitable license to build the American Gatling gun. By the end of the 1880s, the works was capable of building and arming a battleship, such as HMS Victoria. Armstrong set about enlarging his estate until it encompassed 1,700 acres, on which he planted 7 million trees and a forest of rhododendrons. To extend the house, he employed Richard Norman Shaw, one of the most talented of the younger generation of Victorian architects. He raised the tower so that glimpses of it added picturesque interest to the approach. And he sited a second tower to do the same, though with a different shape, at the next turn of the drive. At the end of the drive, the facade is displayed like a stage backcloth. The carriage circle makes a place to pause and take in the whole elaborate composition of different styles and shapes, with which Shaw chose to express Armstrong's position as a wealthy entrepreneur and the long tradition of English gentry. The choice of stone as the main building material was logical enough. It was quarried on the spot or from the hill behind. It's also a quality material and demonstrates the wealth involved, especially in the fine cutting, as well as the solidity of the structure. But perhaps what's most interesting is the range of styles and their historical references. The main feature is the tower, suggestive of the Englishman's castle. In form, it's like the many border towers of the 16th century, such as Fatlip's Castle in nearby Roxburghshire. Armstrong called it the Gilnockie Tower, after the home of a 16th century robber baron called Armstrong. And he enjoyed the historical reference, commissioning an imaginative painting to hang in his house. The half-timbered gallery offers a rather different set of associations. Its bold black and white is not truly structural. It's clear enough. And bring in manor houses such as Ightham Moat, or buildings like Lavenham Guildhall, structures of the great Tudor period of merchant venturing. The same imagery is picked up in the gabled attic, which is in fact the master bedroom. Then there are medieval associations in the carriage archway. The Victorians saw this Gothic style as their true national style. But the main entrance arch has richer mouldings as an indication of the fixed hierarchies underlying the design of a Victorian mansion. The same distinctions can be seen in the windows. Larger and more costly designs light the gentry rooms. This, for instance, lights the entrance hall. But this plainer, smaller window is for the servants' hall. The house is sited so that your route brings you straight to the dramatic composition of the whole facade. There's not even a projecting porch to interrupt the backdrop. Instead, a recessed entry leads to a door which opens straight into a hall. To one side is an area with a fire and places to sit and wait. It's richly panelled in an almost Jacobean style. This entrance hall is the centre of the house's circulation space. The functional hierarchy of the architecture shows at once. The smaller, lower archway, closed by a door, leads to the hidden service rooms. The gentry are led directly on through the large open archway to the principal rooms of the house. The passage, part of the original house, is not well lit. That's because Shaw's additional rooms have taken the place of its windows. Shaw tried to solve the problem of light by cutting through one of the original walls to form an arched alcove with a door to the garden. The corridor runs the whole length of the original house. And then, when you're past that, Norman Shaw was able to preface his first extensions with this rather wider lobby. There are doors leading off it to both the new living rooms. This one's called the library. You enter, almost but not quite, opposite a window, and are drawn round to the diagonal axis of the room. And here we can see how the architect has manipulated space, that's another part of his skill, to create a living area that meets the functional requirements of a wealthy Victorian and his wife. The fireplace is the focus of the end wall, and would, of course, have been the place to sit in winter or in the evening. Beside it, the deep bay window makes an alternative space for daytime or summer. Of course, as the main living room of the enlarged house, it's richly decorated. That was part of Victorian taste, suited to a wealthy gentleman. Equally typical of the period is the frank assemblage of a series of different stylistic motifs. Stained glass in the windows is a medieval touch. They were supplied by the fashionable design firm of Morris & Co. But it's very different in feel from the blue and white tiles of the fireplace, which are Renaissance in character. Blue and white was the very latest taste in 1870. It was part of the growing fashion for the Oriental. But that is also used in carved wooden decorations, designed by the architect. Along with the latest fashions at Cragside went an interest in the latest technology. Armstrong's inventive bent resulted in the first domestic electric lighting in the world. As the principal living room, it's expressed externally by its large bay window. Next to it, with a smaller bay, is the dining room, the other main room of the first extension. This faces northwest, and so it's rather darker. In this room, the space is centred on the round table in front of the stone fireplace. The room looks solidly traditional, with its heavily beamed ceiling. A close look shows that the beams are in fact only boarded casings for invisible steel beams. Victorian architecture often used modern materials, but saw no need to reveal them. It was the visible space that mattered. Here, that space is dominated by the massive Gothic overmantel with its medieval-style carving that incorporates the Armstrong coat of arms. The whole thing is derived from the kitchen fireplace at Fountains Abbey. But this is an ingle nook with its own inner fireplace. It's a feature that derives ultimately from vernacular cottage architecture and emphasises the cosy values of hearth and home. It was where Lord Armstrong chose to have his portrait painted, but it's treated with a grandeur more suited to a rich medieval monastery than a cottage. I think the connotations of the ingle nook were very important to Armstrong and his architect, and they went to great lengths to achieve it. For instance, the flue from the boiler, which is down below here, had to be squeezed across into the wall behind me before being swung back into the main chimney. That was to make room for these stained glass windows beside the fireplace. Because what's going on here is not just a matter of space and structure. It's the design of the complete surroundings, which includes, for instance, these fire dogs designed by the architect, and this pair of benches on either side of the fire. Then again, across the whole end of the room, there's a great built-in buffet designed by the architect, flanked on one side by the door for the gentry, and this matching door leads to the kitchen. Here, the feel is very different, and there are no historical references. The kitchen itself is designed for functional efficiency. The glazed brick walls are easy to clean, as well as making the room light. The double height helps to cope with the heat from the range, and the 2 tiers of windows give a good light for working. And the range is a massive affair to cope with the parties of important guests whom Armstrong entertained. And, not surprisingly, it incorporates a spit turned by hydraulic power. In this house, the architect had to accommodate his client's inventions, as well as his comfort and taste. The hydraulic gadgets and the electricity needed power from lakes, of which Armstrong made 5. So the romantic landscape is not just an additional pleasure ground, but also a functional adjunct to the house and the way it worked. The kitchen and service rooms lie along the back of the old house. So the service passage leads us back to the entrance hall where we began. Then for the gentry, the route goes on through the arch and up the main stair to the upper floors. The arrangement is that of a traditional English newel stair, but the decoration is interesting. The lions, which Armstrong had converted as lamp holders in 1880, are heraldic beasts, reminders of chivalry and nobility. Armstrong was, in fact, created a baron in 1887. Also on the stair are specially constructed niches to hold the sculptures that were to be expected as the possessions of an aristocrat or a man of wealth in the 19th century. An archway at the head of the stairs leads through to where Shaw extended the southern end of the old house. One route leads on to the gallery and grand drawing room, and here Shaw was able to make a small lobby, rather more spacious than the corridor of the original house, which runs on here, directly over the ground floor corridor. It's decorated in much the same way, with Mallorca tiles and embossed wallpaper. And the whole of this side is given over to a series of bedrooms. They were decorated in the latest taste, and several of them have William Morris wallpapers. This one's called Fruit. Another is Bird and Trellis, both of which were actually designed in 1864. Being on the southwest side of the house, the bedrooms have splendid views across the valley of the Debden Burn. And the views from the bedrooms are an important feature of Cragside. Well, these rooms, with their smart decoration and fine views, were obviously right for Lord and Lady Armstrong and their guests. The other side of the house, which runs back into the hill, was given over to servants. And there were some 23 indoor staff in this house, plus, of course, visitors' servants. And there's a strategically placed door that leads directly onto the service stair. And one flight leads back down to the kitchens, and the staircase rises the whole height of the house. As you see, it's a completely different world. Bare wooden stairs, very plain decoration. At this point, a doorway leads through to the nursery suite, the top floor of the gentry part of the house. And there are 3 floors of servants' bedrooms and storerooms besides up here. This passage, an extension over the kitchen, leads to a set of maids' bedrooms. Well, these are good-sized rooms for servants. The furniture that's in them at the moment is what you'd expect in a better servant's room of the late 19th century. They've even got hot water pipes for heating. And large, convenient windows that look out into the courtyard. Back in the gentry part of the house, Shaw, in 1872-7, added further rooms on top of the entrance front. They're reached by a stairway from the lobby at the end of the first floor corridor. The first space you come to is the gallery, which has a total length of over 70 feet. It's lit from above to provide even light on the pictures, which were very much the expected possession of a man of wealth. It also housed Lord Armstrong's scientific collections. From one end of the gallery, a small stair leads up to the master bedroom. This was originally designed as a billiard room, so it's a good size. But the suite, which includes a matching dressing room, was soon converted as the main guest bedroom. In fact, these rooms were decorated much as you see them for Lord Armstrong's grandest visitors, the Prince and Princess of Wales, in 1884. Plumbed baths and basins were still uncommon, the height of luxury. The centrepiece is the grand owl bedstead, designed by Shaw in 1875. To fit it in, he had to block one of the original windows. And the rather odd ceiling shape was the direct result of his decision to have picturesque half-timbered gables on the facade. The old English yeoman style didn't lend itself easily to grandeur. The gallery is hardly a room in itself. In terms of plan, it functions as little more than a corridor leading to the drawing room. Well, the drawing room really is the final fanfare of your progress through the house. It's the last of Shaw's additions, and it marks the completion of that 20-year development from a relatively modest mansion of the 1860s through the complete, not to say luxurious, gentleman's residence to something that's effectively palatial. It's quite the largest room in the house and dominated, as you see, by that 20-foot-high chimney-piece. It's a thoroughly opulent display of Italian marble designed in the rich English Renaissance style. This room has all the grandeur that's consistent with a visit from the Prince and Princess of Wales, who were among the first visitors to Cragside after its completion. In the 1880s and 1890s, Cragside was visited by a number of heads of state and high-powered delegations, potential or actual clients for Armstrong's weapons and warships. The architecture creates the appropriate setting for such gatherings, though it's a matter of speculation whether the house should be regarded as built on the profits of Armstrong's works or as an investment providing the right sort of ambience for potential clients. However, there's no denying the development to palatial splendor in this drawing room. The room, like the gallery, is top-lit because it's squeezed in between the house and the hill and has no view. But it housed some of Armstrong's best pictures. These included Millet's Chill October and Frederick Leighton's Noble Lady of Venice, which would have been fashionable and expensive at the time. The decoration is stylistically more consistent than the library. Both ceiling and overmantel are based on Renaissance prototypes. Yet the room retains an inglenook and a bay, though both are subtly different. The inglenook is like a small separate room within the room, intimate and cave-like. The bay is much less spacious than that in the library, and it's cut off by its arch, rather than included in the main space. However, it's important as a feature of the exterior. The bay repeats the Elizabethan-style motifs that were so much a part of Shaw's picturesque composition. The huge size of the room is concealed, as half of it lies behind the tower. The inglenook projects at the other end and is treated like a massive Gothic chimney structure. Yet the picturesque Elizabethan chimneys are in fact false. To obtain a decent draught, the real flue is taken up the hillside like a mine chimney and disguised as a rocky outcrop. At Cragside, it was the image that was important, and the architect had to balance appearance against convenience. For instance, the 4 light windows in this gable are important to the pattern of the facade, but hardly convenient from inside. What Shaw had to provide for Armstrong was a sound structure making use of the latest technology. But he also had to arrange his extensions to provide a home that was reasonably convenient and functional. And an important part of this function was the provision of a suitable image for a new rich nobleman moving into the highest circles. The size, the grandeur, and the references to past styles give Cragside and its owner an appearance of pedigree. The effect of all Norman Shaw's work at Cragside is that the house appears to have grown over the centuries as the ancestral home of a man of lineage.
And that ends our broadcast for the Open University. Good night.